Juice Fest killed the media's favorite Lane Kiffin narrative, and that is that he can't recruit high school players. He can, he just goes about it differently than everybody else.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Rebel Nation. I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. Today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast dives into a super successful Juice Fest weekend. The theme this weekend might just be recommitments, with Corey Amos recommitting to Ole Miss over the weekend and possibly another recruit joining the fold soon. Despite the media's constant criticism of Lane Kiffin's high school recruiting, he's proving them wrong by doing what he has to and doing it at a very high level. This is the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers who make the show what it is. And don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC, or even Zach Blackerby at Locked On Auburn, provide perspectives on college football, the SEC, and heck, even Ole Miss, so check them out as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting the way we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So Ole Miss just finished a hyper-successful Juice Fest weekend, and we told you going into this Juice Fest weekend that it might look a little bit different. In the 2025 class, it was pretty cut and dry what was left. There's a whole bunch of players that Ole Miss might be willing to flip. There's also some players that Ole Miss found in camp offers and stuff like that that might be fits for the 105 whenever that becomes a thing. But for all intents and purposes, it's kind of at a staying point. So the 2024 Juice Fest was put together for the class of 2026, plus some players that they are working towards getting to the finish line with. And one of the big surprises that happened this weekend, Corey Amos just up and recommitted. If people do not remember what Corey Amos was or who he was a defensive lineman out of Opelousas, Alabama, 6'2", 205 pounds. He's an edge player. He's a jack. Extremely athletic. He decommitted from Ole Miss when the dead period started. When the dead period kicked off at the first part of July, he was a part of that group that decommitted. And everybody started losing their mind. I think it was Dylan Alford. I think a Kylan Deere committed at that time frame too. But he was a player that committed and decommitted during that time frame. We talked to Brian Smith, the Locked On recruiting czar, about Corey Amos when he was committed to Ole Miss, and he raved on him. He was a super athletic guy. He can play a lot of different positions. Really, really good football player, and he would have fit in with what Pete Golding was doing. Obviously, Pete Golding taking him back kind of proves that to be true. So it will be very interesting to see if he gets anybody to join him. Now, the way that recruiting goes, and since I am not a credentialed Ole Miss media member, I can pretty much say what I want to say. But in recruiting, there's a whole lot of give and take. You want to be available, you want to shut it down, but you want to also make sure you get the most out of it you can. I do not blame the high school kids for doing it. The reason I cover high school recruiting the way I do is because I understand this. And I do understand that it's going to go back and forth, and you need to celebrate who you have as long as you have them. But when they leave, you probably shouldn't rail on them. So I didn't. Whenever all these players decommitted, I didn't make excuses. I didn't say anything about that because there was always a chance they could go back. And I do have the opinion on high school recruiting. It isn't about winning the battle. It's about finishing in the top two. I think that is the most important step for high school recruiting, because all of these guys are going to go to their places, and you have 9 opportunities after signing day to sign these players. So whenever you lose a player, it's not the end of the world. And I understand that in the age of recruiting sites like On3, 24/7, and Rivals, those guys, they have a whole ecosystem that is built around high school recruiting. Everything is going to be high school recruiting centric because it has to be. They can't cover the transfer portal and all that. There's just not enough bodies. All of a sudden, the business will not become profitable. So everything is going to revolve around high school recruiting. So whenever you get a high school decommit, they are going to freak out. They are going to talk about what's wrong. They are going to try and control that narrative. But that's simply because it benefits them and their business model for high school football recruiting to become the center of the universe. And that just isn't the case anymore in college football. It's not. After high school recruiting signing day, you'd have to sit out a year and transfer. You'd transfer and sit out a year. It was very, very difficult, and you could build specifically from high school recruiting. That was the way that rosters were built. Now, Ole Miss has like 55 or 60 players that are from the transfer portal. I have talked all the time about how this year is kind of a proof of concept year for Ole Miss. And if Ole Miss makes the playoff, you are going to see other schools recruit the same way Ole Miss does, which is far less reliant on high school recruiting, far more reliant on the transfer portal and putting together classes that way. That's why the blue chip ratio, all of this stuff that was the foundation of recruiting services and all that, it doesn't mean anything anymore. The transfer portal has completely zapped that. Now you just need proof of concept of one of these transfer portal teams to go really far. And honestly, with TCU 2 years ago against Georgia, you kind of had that, of a team that made the playoff and made a run. But Corey Amos recommitting to Ole Miss, that's one of the reasons I didn't bag on Corey Amos. That's one of the reasons I didn't bag on Dylan Alford, is because they're not done. This isn't over. There's not finality. People want finality in recruiting. Whenever somebody commits, they want that to be over and they want to be able to talk about it, but it's not. It's not over when you sign anymore. It's not over when you transfer anymore. It's just not final. It's a year-to-year type thing to where people trying to follow rosters and follow recruiting and all of that stuff, it will be much harder. I do understand that. But it's not just based off of the old thinking as well. If you cannot any longer put this square peg into that round hole, it just doesn't fit anymore. And Corey Amos recommitting, that's the way that works. And there's a chance that as early as tonight, another player could recommit to Ole Miss, and that's Dylan Alford. He visited Ole Miss on Juice Fest over the weekend. He was at Clemson the first part of the weekend, and he will pick, I think, tonight, if I'm not mistaken, between Clemson and Ole Miss. And honestly, the kid's from Goshen, Mississippi. He had his head turned about Clemson. He has not committed to Clemson. It's a situation that I like Ole Miss's chances. And Lane Kiffin has done a fantastic job kind of reeling this in and doing what he has to in high school recruiting and bringing people into Juice Fest to where it wasn't necessarily to get commitments and these people that just farm commitments on these cookouts, because those don't necessarily matter. It's about building relationships. It's about building trust with all of these young guys to the point where whenever things don't go what they're thinking is going to happen over there, they come back over here. And Lane Kiffin's doing a pretty good job of that. I think high school players can be the most expensive players that people are going to get in this NIL era. I think that makes it problematic. And I think Lane Kiffin knows that as an early adopter. So he's just basically killed the narrative that he can't recruit high school players because he does it, but he does it in a different way. And it's in a way that's against their business model. And because of that, there's like, oh, they're decommitment. Something's wrong. We do not need Lane Kiffin to be successful. That is the reason the media is all over Lane Kiffin. He does things a little bit different. He's an early adopter. Like I said, this roster is probably 60 players from the transfer portal right now. If you don't believe me, go to OleMissSports.com and go to the roster and look at it, because they list their former schools right there, and you can see all of them. All of that, and knowing what's going to come with the 105 and all of this stuff moving around and very moving targets, Lane Kiffin has done a fantastic job. And not just high school recruiting, but just recruiting in general. There is honestly no high school recruiting anymore. There's just roster building. There's honestly no recruiting anymore. There's just roster building. And this roster that Ole Miss has right now is probably the best roster that they have had in my entire lifetime. I don't even think that's particularly close. And it might be the greatest roster that Ole Miss has ever assembled. Lane Kiffin in recruiting and high school recruiting, however you want to look at it, has just killed the media's narrative that he cannot build a roster. That's just the way it is. Anyway, coming up next on Locked On Ole Miss spent a good part of the weekend getting a head start on the 2026 class. We'll dive into the latest recruits and what is this early action means for the Ole Miss Rebels. Stay tuned for that. You know, it's summertime, which means it's barbecue season. So stock up on all your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase you use with Ibotta. So you won't have to choose between burgers and hot dogs. You can get both. Ibotta is a free app that lets you get cash back every single time you shop. Earn hundreds on items of groceries to beauty supplies to even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. It's time you joined the over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta. It is using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. You know, the most anticipated Ole Miss season is upon us, and some great games are on the schedule. So fuel up for them with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for the season thanks to a menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are a dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine. So what are you waiting for? With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll have new flavors to explore. Make your day delicious. From breakfast to dessert, stay fueled with easy, nutritious options. Keep kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes or less. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. Enjoy effortless support for your lifestyle. Choose 6 menu preferences to help manage your calories, maximize protein intake, avoid meat, or simply eat well balanced. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50, all one word, and use code LockedOnCollege50, again, one word, to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month. That's code LockedOnCollege50 at factorsmeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume? With all of that shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you each and every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And there's still time to join the Grove Collective and help Ole Miss football be elite. You can go to thegrovecollective.com and join today. So we talked in the first segment about how the narrative of Lane Kiffin not be able to recruit high school players, that's just been killed this weekend. And part of that is the relationships that were built with junior 2026 players, because most of the high school relationship building was done on the junior side. And the player that gets all the headlines there is Ryder Lines. He's a quarterback out of Folsom, California, 6'2", 205. Again, we talked to Brian Smith, the czar of recruiting and Locked On, and he talked about how he is a perfect fit for Ole Miss's offense, very RPO centric, but when he throws the ball, I mean, it's obvious. It's a Chad Kelly type talent when the ball leaves his hand. If you look at him on On3, his lowest ranking as 50th in the country, not quarterback, player. 247 Sports has him the 7th rated player in the country. ESPN has him at number 35, and Rivals.com has him at number 4. Really, really good athletic player. And so why am I talking about it? Why is that being brought up all the time? Well, this is from David Johnson from Inside the Rebels. He put out an interview where he spoke to Ryder Lines after the game. He said Ole Miss has pulled even at the top after a weekend at Juice Fest. He had an interview with him on the site. If you're interested in that, check that out. But Ryder Lines, the leader is probably USC. He's a guy that looks destined to sign with USC out of high school, much like Jackson Dart did. You know how I feel about this transfer portal and how Ole Miss recruits. It's not whether you're the number one. It need to be in the top 2. If you win, great. If not, get him the next time, because after signing day, there's 9 more times to get these athletes. Get one of those, win that recruitment, get him on campus, and all of a sudden have a Jackson Dart type impact on your team. Now, make no mistake, with Jackson Dart on campus right now, with Matt Corral before him, Ole Miss has had a West Coast-centric quarterback on their campus since 2019. I understand that the Corral, John Rice Plumlee thing happened in 2019, but that's still 5 years where a reputation of the quarterbacks in Cali, they have watched Jackson Dart play at USC. They know about Matt Corral, what he did in high school as well. It is a situation to where Ole Miss is in a really good spot for Ryder Lines. If he signs with USC out of high school, fine. Get him on the switch. Just like Jackson Dart, after year 1, if something happens, be ready to pounce. Be ready, maintain that relationship. Because this is what high school recruiting is now. It is not about getting these kids. It's not. It used to be about getting these kids, and you had to have things like the blue chip ratio and all of that stuff to compete. It is not that way now. With high school kids, it is 100% about relationships and building something that can withstand in the future. If they sign NIL-wise at one of these NIL giants like Texas or Georgia or USC or something like that, will you have the perspective to whenever they want to reset and become a player, they're ready to come to your place? This is what makes Lane Kiffin special. This is what makes Lane Kiffin different. And lots of people that look at the high school recruiting and they are financially invested in that, not necessarily NIL I'm just talking about the business model around covering high school football recruiting. They are not going to like the 9 transfer portal windows that a player can get into. Literally every window they could make that jump. All they have to do is be eligible and then go to another school. Lane Kiffin understanding that and building those relationships and establishing a network, honestly, of players that have good feelings, good vibes about Ole Miss. This is why Ole Miss is dominating and getting these great players in the transfer portal. Walter Nolan. Walter Nolan signed with Texas A&M. Everybody remembers his recruitment. I believe he was in the class that was the greatest high school football recruiting class in the history of high school football recruiting. Walter Nolan was in that class. He was originally from Olive Branch, Mississippi. Tennessee worked it out somehow way, whatever. His family ended up moving to East Tennessee. It looked like he was going to Tennessee. A&M swooped in with an offer. He took it. And that's fine. That is how high school recruiting works. And it's always how high school recruiting works. But Lane Kiffin had the relationship from his time in Oxford, from them at Olive Branch, to where whenever it came transfer time, Walter Nolan came home. Build relationships in high school recruiting. Force your opponents to have to overpay for high school recruits. Get them in the transfer portal. That is the formula for Ole Miss. That is the formula for them to be successful. That is the formula, honestly, for staying power. But the media, the ones that are financially invested in all of this stuff surrounding high school recruiting, they're going to have their narrative. It's not true. It's a lie. Ole Miss is just doing it a little bit differently. And that is going to drive people absolutely insane. Don't go anywhere. Up next, we dive into this season that we've all been waiting for our whole lives. This is the moment Ole Miss fans have been dreaming about. Stick around. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer and fewer games, and these sports just aren't sportsing the way we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep these sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. Maybe you want to bet on Ole Miss and their over-under of 9.5 wins this season, or Jackson Dart at plus 1,500 to win the Heisman. Now's your chance. All this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, it's an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Locked On Sports Today is now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Be part of history. So players are set to report tomorrow for physicals and equipment and all of that stuff the day before they get there. The first practice, which will be a helmets only practice for the first 2 days, is going to be Wednesday. And if I'm not mistaken, it might be in the evening time or something like that, just to avoid the heat of the day kind of what's going on. It's here, everybody, is my point. Everything we've talked about since December 30th, 31st, somewhere in there, until now, it's here. We can all wonder about what's going on. I've asked every guest that I've had about storylines that they were looking to in the fall, and each and every single one of them had a different answer. If it was Tom Vanderford, he was talking about running backs. If it was John Macon Gillespie, it was wide receivers. Somebody even mentioned backup quarterbacks. I think it was Dalen Flowers that did that as well. We are very, very close and very, very fired up to what could be a monumental season for Ole Miss football. Ole Miss has a chance to do something this season that none of us under the age of 65 probably can remember seeing. And that is really great. And we're going to have all kinds of fun around Ole Miss football this season. From uniforms, yes, we're going to talk about uniforms. If they make it about uniforms and we like uniforms, we're going to talk about uniforms. I do think the Johnny Vaught special needs to be considered if Ole Miss earns the right. And what I mean by earns the right is if they have one or no losses going into that Georgia game. If they earn the right, that is the only way that I want this to happen. But if that does happen at the Georgia game, I want numbers on the side of the helmet, the old Johnny Vaught numbers. I want the powder blue helmet. I want navy blue jerseys, and I want gray pants. period. On a game like this, whenever you do the next step, this is honestly the logical next step to the Alabama game in 2014. If Ole Miss gets to that Georgia game at that point. We all remember what 2003 LSU was. We all remember what 2014 Alabama was. 2024 Georgia has a chance to be the next evolution of that. And a nod to Johnny Vaught would be an unbelievably electric thing, especially with everybody in that stadium when they see it. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that game might be earmarked to be the Realtree game, if we're just being honest, thinking about that. I've heard rumors about the new Realtree setup. So that's probably going to dominate the helmet in that situation. But if you look at the navy jersey and the white pants, that still has a chance to look really good. But that is just my thought. And I went off onto a tangent talking about it. But this is the season that especially everybody my age has pointed to. I was 1 year old when Ole Miss beat Notre Dame. I was 7 years old for the immaculate deflection. My father threw me up on his shoulders whenever the ball got blown back. I remember it vividly. I remember the cheering. I can describe that thing in detail to everybody, even though there's like 430,000 people that were at that game now. I can remember, David Browndyke on his wide left and Tom Stocker on the call in 1986. I can remember 89 with the cardiac Rebels, with the play against Tulane and the play against Georgia and the heartbreak against LSU and the sad Chucky Mullins stuff that was just a gut punch. I remember 1990 having an unbelievably good team and then drawing Michigan in the Gator Bowl, who was probably the best team in the country that year. I remember the probation, just knee deep in that probation to where they didn't even paint the field. They were so broke because of the probation. I remember Tommy Tuberville recruiting a bunch of walk-ons and then eventually recruiting like Romero Miller and Deuce McAllister and Terrence Metcalf, Grant Hurd and all those guys, starting a bowl streak that went on through until David Cutcliffe's last year. I remember when I worked at Ole Miss under Ed Orgeron, I remember what that felt like whenever it was 34-31 against Northwestern State in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. I remember that. I remember Houston Nutt in his back-to-back 50-win seasons, or 50 years. It's been 50 years since you won back-to-back New Year's games or something like that. I remember 2012 and how weird it was, and Bo Wallace and all that waking up. The Alabama game I was at, the in 14, and the game in 15 is magical. And then all of a sudden, all of the stuff happened with Steve Robertson and Mississippi State and the NCAA and all that, and Ole Miss went on to probation. Matt Luke was an excellent steward of the program. I will not hate on him for that, but he led us to Lane Kiffin, and Lane Kiffin has quietly and consistently built Ole Miss up to the roster that we see at this point and has got us to this point where we have waited our whole life until this season. This year is going to be fun. I'm going to do my best to make it fun, or at least more fun, and we are all going to enjoy it together, and we'll see exactly how that goes. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. We have the most perspective surrounding Ole Miss sports, and it's one of the many reasons why we're the #1 Ole Miss podcast. Thank you for your support. And now you can become a Locked On Ole Miss insider in what is sure to be the best way to follow Ole Miss sports, and certainly the easiest. It is a texting program where you ask to be notified on everything relevant to Ole Miss sports, and you can get this without having to deal with all these message board trolls. So the best part of it is it comes with a 14-day free trial. Going to add perks as it grows. We're going to have a sale whenever fall camp starts, but it should be the future of college sports coverage. So link is in the description if you're interested in this Insiders program. For those of you on YouTube, we're going to send you to Locked On today, right now. Howdy toddy, everyone.